President Trump has called on Iran for unconditional surrender.
Trump says he knows where Iran's supreme leader is hiding, called him an easy target, but says he's not going to kill him for now.
Unacceptable as they can lead to the most dire consequences, not just the Middle East region, but for the world as a whole. These calls of ours were not heeded.
Welcome, it's Nishma Minhas with GVS Deep Dive. The US president calls for unconditional surrender as missiles rain down on Iran and its top generals, which are killed in Israeli airstrikes. Now the air war has been raging for a fifth day. One global power remains notably silent. Where is China hiding? Despite being Iran's top oil customer, a key trade partner, and an obvious counterweight to United States dominance, Beijing has been quiet, apart from telling its citizens yesterday to leave Israel. And where's Russia in all of this? These two powers claimed to be building a multipolar world. But when Israel struck Iran in its Operation Rising Lion, neither stood in the way. Finally, after 5 days, President Xi Jinping said on Tuesday that China is deeply worried about Israel's military operation against Iran that has escalated tensions in the Middle East. He made the comments in his address at the summit with 5 Central Asian nations in the Kazakh capital of Astana. All parties should work to de-escalate the conflict as soon as possible and prevent the situation from worsening further. And he added that China is ready to play a constructive role in restoring peace and stability in the Middle East. At the same time, we have President Donald Trump saying that he wants a real end to the nuclear dispute with Iran and not just a ceasefire. And the G7 put out their usual platitudes of calling for de-escalation in the Israeli-Iran war and expressing their support for Israel and labeling Iran as a source of instability in the Middle East. Trump, who on Monday posted on Truth Social, he told 10 million people living in Tehran to immediately evacuate the city. He said, Iran should have signed the deal. I told them to sign. What a shame and waste of human life. Simply stated, Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. I said it over and over again. Before ending the post with, everyone should immediately evacuate Tehran. It's still not clear whether the real end for him involves the United States to become actively involved in the attack to bunker bomb Iranian nuclear facilities. However, it is seeming that he is losing his cool. While the White House said that the United States isn't joining Israel's attacks on Iran, there has been a massive military buildup in the region. A third United States Navy destroyer entered the Eastern Mediterranean Sea to help defend Israel from further Iranian ballistic missiles. And a second United States carrier strike group is heading towards the Arabian Sea. Tanker aircraft that could potentially help refuel Israeli jet fighters also appear to be heading into the region. This is according to flight trackers and people familiar with the matter. While the Pentagon says that the military buildup is purely defensive, it puts the United States on a firmer footing to join Israeli attacks on Iran should President Trump decide to do that. So why do we find the Chinese way of expressing support to Iran strange? And how close are the Chinese and Iranians anyway? Why does China's response to the Iran-Israel war feel so strange, so muted, so out of sync with what we would expect from a so-called great power? Many expect that China, as a rising superpower, to take a much clearer, cleaner stance, especially given that it's seen as a challenger to United States influence. In recent years, China has positioned itself as a major diplomatic player, mediating agreements like the Saudi-Iran détente, it did so in 2023, and promoting its vision of what it calls a multipolar world. However, China doesn't work the way that the West does. So in the past 70 years or so in our living memories, we're conditioned by Western models of alliance behavior. Unlike the US or Russia, China does not anchor its alliances in ideology or self-imposed values, specifically Western values. It doesn't have an axis of evil mindset like the US defines for us every decade, or a NATO-like framework. We're used to seeing United States allies shielded by aircraft carriers, NATO's Article 5 offering mutual defense treaties, the all for one and one for all type promises, even if they actually don't actualize in reality. We're used to seeing rapid reaction forces and open declarations of loyalty and support. Much of this we've already seen just during this Israeli-Iranian war as well that's taking place. So even Russia, when it chooses sides like it did in Syria, it sent in warplanes and it put boots on the ground to save the Assad regime. But Chinese foreign policy is very different. Its support is not emotional, it's not military, it's not public, it's strategic, it's quiet. And its silence suggests a cautious, risk-averse approach, which prioritizes stability over high-profile diplomacy in most cases. That's why when Iran is bombed and its generals are killed, Beijing doesn't rush in to defend it. It issued a bland statement about dialogue and restraint. And for many observers, that feels like abandonment. Now remember though, China criticizes Western interference in regional conflicts and emphasizes non-intervention. This is a key part of its foreign policy. On April the 9th, 1974, Deng Xiaoping led a Chinese delegation to the 6th special session of the United Nations General Assembly. This was the first high-level Chinese delegation to the UNGA after the restoration of China's seat in the United Nations. In his speech, he said, "China is not a superpower, nor will she ever seek to be one. If one day China should change her color and turn into a superpower, if she too should play the tyrant in the world, and everywhere subject others to her bullying, aggression, and exploitation, the people of the world should identify her as social imperialism, expose it, oppose it, and work together with the Chinese people to overthrow it." Now you may say that was 50 years ago, and well before China became an economic superpower it is today. Well, recently also, President Xi Jinping, and on many different occasions, reiterated China's commitment of not seeking hegemony, no matter what stage of development it reaches, saying that China will neither import models from other countries, nor export the Chinese model, or ask other countries to copy the Chinese practice. Staying relatively silent allows Beijing to contrast itself with the United States, which is deeply involved in Israel-Iran rivalry. China positions itself as that rational alternative to Western militarism, a non-hegemonic global power. And that's why they offered to mediate but took no sides. Russia's doing the same. President Putin spoke with President Erdogan, floated mediation, warned of regional destabilization, but again offered no military support to Iran. Let's be realistic, it's not in the position to do so either right now. China maintains relations with Iran, a US adversary, but it's also engaging with Israel, a US ally. Openly taking sides could strain ties with either country or draw China into the US-led Western narrative on the conflict. The moment China begins playing by American rules through military interventions, proxy wars, or even carving out these spheres of influence, we're no longer in that multipolar world. We're back in that cycle of imperial rivalry, except this time we're cloaking it in a different set of moral justifications. In the short term, countries like Iran or Palestine might welcome this, but soon enough, many across the global south would realize that China's pledges of non-interference and respect for sovereignty were no more meaningful than the American promises of democracy and human rights. In Beijing's view, wars are disruptions, not opportunities. Its strategy is to stay neutral in public and support its partners quietly. For example, through oil purchases, UN vetoes, provide weapons technology, and build influence over number of decades, not through dramatic moments. And that's why Chinese support doesn't come with those fireworks, the aircraft carriers, or bombastic statements. Instead, you get these muted press releases and small diplomatic gestures. So the Chinese support feels strange because we're conditioned to see support as dramatic, as emotional, as military. China redefines it as silent, economic, and long-term. And that's what makes it look indifferent when allies are under fire. That is not to say it will never change or adapt to an increasing awareness of its own power and what that means for its foreign policy. Let's start with the basics. Yes, China and Iran have a relationship, but it's transactional to a large extent, not military. And by the way, China has deep economic ties with both Iran, which is a key energy supplier and a BRI partner, and Israel, which is a technology and investment hub. In 2021, the Chinese signed a 25-year strategic cooperation agreement worth up to $400 billion with the Iranians. China gets cheap oil, Iran gets investment, telecoms, and various kinds of infrastructure. But it was not a defense pact. So when Iran was attacked, when its top generals were killed, when the nuclear facilities were bombed, China didn't do anything. Beijing's not going to rush to defend its so-called partner because Iran is not an ally that China's going to go to war for. It's not a red line. China's interest in the Middle East isn't revolutionary or ideological or even being pushed by APAC lobbying as it is for the United States. It's mostly logistical. Over 40% of China's oil comes from the Gulf. China purchases nearly 90% of Iran's oil exports, which are sanctioned. So these are majorly discounted source of crude oil for the Chinese and for other countries that buy them. The Chinese oil trade accounts for almost 20% of Iran's economy. And the oil is bought with the Chinese yuan, which ensures that Iran then spends the money on Chinese goods. In 2023, China brokered the Saudi-Iran peace deal. It did so at a time when both countries' tensions were much lower. It wanted stability in its oil routes and its Belt and Road ports. War is bad for business. War spikes energy prices. It disrupts global trade. And it puts Beijing's $1 trillion Middle East investments at risk. But that, critics argue, is exactly why China should now be getting involved. After all, approximately 1/5 of global oil trade transits through the Strait of Hormuz. And with a fragile economy at home, China can't afford a new crisis. Remember, in the past 40 years, as the Israel and the US defense lobby has pushed the United States into war after war, wasting trillions of dollars in endless wars, as Trump has said himself in the past, China has been focused on its internal development. For China, wading into wars makes no sense unless red lines, which it has clearly demarcated, are involved. For example, Taiwan, or potentially in the South China Sea, rather than wading into a complex, decades-old Middle Eastern conflict. China has less incentive to engage loudly here. In the future, China is likely to see an increase in demand from Iran as well for its military weapons, so potentially increasing its trade on that as well. The J-10Cs that performed so well in recent India-Pakistan mini-war scenario are something that many are talking about that Iran should have had instead of its Russian arms that it had right now. However, there is a strategic need for China to help Iran. As Mike Flynn, the former NSA in the first Trump administration, put it recently on a podcast. By defeating the current administration in Iran, the US can find a more compliant regime in the Middle East for not only weakening China, weakening the BRI project in that region, but also allowing the United States itself to start focusing on China.
China, China, China. That's what I want your audience to understand. A positive US relationship with an Iranian regime, so whatever the regime is that rises up out of the ashes, if we have a positive relationship with that regime, that really benefits the United States of America, particularly against China, and it weakens China.
By doing nothing, China runs the risk that others will define global issues, and thus ultimately it will run the risk of undermining global stability that is what has allowed it to prosper and grow in the past 40 years. I don't want to spend too much time here, but briefly looking at Russia, which has taken a stronger public stance than China, but only with rhetoric. Moscow condemned the Israeli strike as being unprovoked aggression and a violation of international law. The Russian Foreign Ministry said that Iran had every right to defend itself and warned Israel to show restraint and common sense. But like China, Russia's not sending weapons, troops, or intelligence. Why? Because Putin's already deeply entangled in Ukraine, diplomatically isolated and economically squeezed. He can't afford a second front to alienate Israel at the moment, with which he's coordinating in Syria after taking his eye off the ball when it lost that key ally in the form of the Assad regime. So Kremlin is offering condemnation, but no real confrontation to what's going on. So when you ask why are China and Russia not getting involved in the Iran-Israel conflict, the answer is simple. Because war is not in their interest. Because neither is willing to risk its economy, diplomacy, or long-term strategy for Tehran. This is not a fight they want to join. We know this is the fight that is not in the interest of the United States either. It's being pushed by Netanyahu's own desire to stay in power. The real question now is, if this war escalates, will they be able to stay out of it at all? Thank you for watching GVS Deep Dive. If you found this helpful, please like, share, and subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Will China and Russia eventually be pulled into this conflict, or are they playing the smartest game of all, which is waiting while others burn? Have a great day.